At my brother-in-law's engagement party, my father-in-law took the microphone, looked right past me, and said to the whole room, "Well, at least Daniel had better taste the second time around." Everyone laughed. My husband laughed. I stood there holding a glass of sparkling water, smiling the way you smile when someone kicks you under the table and you don't want to make a scene. My cheeks hurt from it. The woman next to me, someone's aunt from Kelowna, patted my arm and said, "Oh, he's just teasing." I nodded. I said, "Of course." But the room had heard it, and I had heard it, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, quiet part of me that had been slowly building itself back up for 3 years just sat back down. Daniel's ex-girlfriend's name was Priya. She was a physician. She came from a family my in-laws had known for 20 years. She and Daniel had dated for 4 years, gotten engaged, and then called it off 8 months before the wedding. I never asked why. It wasn't my story. But apparently, it was mine to carry. I met Daniel 14 months after the breakup. We were both at a continuing education seminar in downtown Toronto. He's an electrical engineer. I work in urban planning for the city of Mississauga. We got stuck at the same table during a lunch break and ended up talking for 2 hours. He asked for my number. I gave it to him. 3 weeks later, we had dinner at a little Portuguese place on College Street, and I thought, this is someone I could actually build something with. His name is Daniel Kowalczyk. His parents are Marek and Helena. They came to Canada from Krakow in the late 80s. Settled in Hamilton. Built a good life. Marek ran a small contracting business. Helena taught piano lessons out of their house until her arthritis got too bad. They raised Daniel and his younger brother Tomasz to be hardworking, polite, and fiercely loyal to family. They were lovely people, to everyone who wasn't me. The first time I met them was 6 months into dating Daniel. We drove to Hamilton on a Saturday in October, and Helena made borscht and pierogi and a pork roast that took 4 hours. The table was set beautifully. There were flowers. I brought wine, a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir, from a winery in Prince Edward County, that a colleague had recommended, and Helena accepted it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Priya always brought flowers," she said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. I should have paid more attention to that moment. The way you notice a single crack in a wall and think, that's probably fine. And then 2 years later, the whole foundation is shifting. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about this kind of thing, it never does. It was small, consistent, a slow drip. Helena would ask about my job and then, mid-conversation, mention something Priya had accomplished. Marek would talk about the future grandchildren, holidays, what Christmas looked like in their house, and managed to describe traditions that Priya had apparently been part of, without ever quite acknowledging that she was no longer in the picture. They framed it as history. Family history. The kind you can't rewrite. I started to feel like a placeholder. Daniel saw some of it. He'd defend me sometimes gently, carefully, the way someone navigates a minefield they've been crossing their whole life. He'd say, "Mum, Rachel's here. Let's talk about something else." Or he'd change the subject before things got too pointed. He loved his parents. I understood that. I didn't want to be the reason his relationship with them fractured, so I stayed quiet. I told myself it would get better, that they needed time, that I was being too sensitive. I cannot tell you how many times I told myself I was being too sensitive. Daniel proposed in March, 2 years after we met. We were at Scarborough Bluffs, which sounds almost absurdly romantic and also completely impractical, because it was barely above zero and I had worn the wrong coat. He got down on one knee in the snow with a ring. His grandmother had left him, a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I said yes before he finished asking. I called my mum that night and cried happy tears into the phone. She lives in New Brunswick, just outside Fredericton. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad." And she meant it in the uncomplicated way that mothers sometimes mean things, which is its own kind of gift. Helena and Marek were told the next day. Helena hugged Daniel. She hugged me too, briefly. Marek shook Daniel's hand and said, "Good, good." There was a pause that felt like a whole paragraph. "The ring is lovely," Helena said, looking at my hand. "It was babcia's," Daniel said. Something moved across Helena's face. She didn't say anything else about it. I know now what she was thinking. Priya had never been given the ring. Daniel had bought Priya a new ring. A bigger one, custom-made. He gave me his grandmother's. I thought it meant something. I still think it does. But I also think, for Helena, it maybe felt like a demotion of an heirloom, like he was giving me something old instead of something chosen. I don't know. I never asked. Maybe I should have. The engagement party was Marek and Helena's idea. They wanted to host it at their house in Hamilton, invite the extended family, do it properly. We said yes. My mom flew in from Fredericton. My older sister Claire drove up from Windsor. I was genuinely looking forward to it. I spent 2 weeks planning what to wear. That's what you do. You plan what to wear to the thing where someone will publicly diminish you, because you don't know yet that's what it is. The party was on a Saturday in June. About 60 people in the backyard, relatives, family, friends, some of Daniel's cousins and their partners. Helena had organized everything beautifully. String lights, a catered spread from a Polish deli in Hamilton, a tiered cake with fresh strawberries. My mum stood next to me most of the evening, squeezing my arm whenever she thought I needed it. Things were fine at first. And then Marek picked up the microphone. He gave a toast. He talked about Daniel growing up, about how proud they were of him, about how important family was. He talked about the future. He got a little misty. It was actually very sweet. And then, near the end, he made a joke, or at least, he delivered it like a joke about how glad they were Daniel had figured out what he was looking for, and that first attempts don't always take. And then he looked directly at me and said, warmly, in front of everyone, "We hope this one sticks." The room laughed, not cruelly, just automatically. The way a room full of people laughs when someone with a microphone implies something is funny. My mum did not laugh. Claire did not laugh. I watched my mum's face go very still. Daniel laughed. Then he looked at me, and the laugh faded. This one. Like I was a sequel. Like I was a second draft. Like the real version had already happened, and I was the revision they'd settled for. I smiled. I excused myself. I went inside to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood over the sink, with the tap running, breathing. My face in the mirror looked like someone who was deciding something without having made the decision yet. I went back out. I said nothing. My mum found me 20 minutes later by the dessert table and said, very quietly, "Are you okay?" And I said yes. And she looked at me for a long time and said, "You don't have to be." And I said, "Not tonight." On the drive back to Mississauga, Daniel apologized. He said his dad hadn't meant it badly, that it was just his sense of humor, that he'd talked to him. I said, okay. I said it very calmly. I was still deciding. By the time we got home, I had decided. I didn't make a scene. I didn't issue ultimatums. I simply became, over the following weeks, someone who was no longer available. I stopped going to Hamilton. I told Daniel I needed space from his parents, and that I would explain more when I could. He was confused. He was hurt. He kept saying, "One comment, Rachel, one comment at a party," and I kept saying, "It wasn't one comment, Daniel. It was never one comment." We had a lot of hard conversations that summer. I told him everything. Every small thing I had catalogued and quietly put away. The borscht dinner, the Christmas traditions, the flowers versus the wine, every Priya used to and every first attempt. He listened. He got quiet in the way people get quiet when they realize they've been missing something. He cried once. "I didn't expect that." He said, "I didn't protect you." I said, "No, you didn't." He said, "I didn't know how." I said, "You need to learn." I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I didn't leave Daniel. I thought about it. I had nights where I lay awake and thought very seriously about what it would mean to walk away from a person I genuinely loved, because his family made me feel like a consolation prize. I thought about the logistics of it, our lease, our shared account at TD, the joint reservation we had for a cottage up near Parry Sound in September. I thought about all of it. I didn't leave, but I did leave Hamilton. And I left the version of myself who smiled through things. And I left the habit of telling myself I was too sensitive. That fall, Daniel had a conversation with his parents. I wasn't there. He told me afterward that his father had been defensive at first, then genuinely embarrassed, then very quiet. His mother had said she didn't realize. Daniel told her that wasn't good enough. She cried. He held his ground. He came home from that trip, looking tired in a specific way. The way you look when you've done something difficult and right. I didn't contact Merrick and Helena. I had nothing to say. I focused on my work. The city had me on a major transit corridor project, something I'd been trying to get assigned to for 2 years, and I threw myself into it. I went to New Brunswick for a long weekend, and sat on my mom's back porch, and watched the river, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding at arm's length. My mom made tea, and didn't ask too many questions. She's good at that. The months went on. Daniel and I found our way back to something steadier. We had real conversations now, not managed ones. He started being more direct with his family's small things, at first, then bigger things. I watched him become someone who stood beside me rather than between me and a fire he was trying to contain. We went to Perry Sound in September. The lake was cold and perfect, and we sat on the dock every morning with coffee and said very little, and that was exactly right. And then, about 8 months after the engagement party, I got an email. Not a text. An email. Helena's formal address, the one she used for her piano students. It was 3 paragraphs long. She wrote that she had done a lot of thinking. She wrote that she had been unfair to me in ways she hadn't let herself see clearly until Daniel made her see them. She wrote that she was ashamed of how she'd treated Priya's memory like a standard I was supposed to be measured against. When Priya was a person she had loved but whose chapter with their family had closed, and I was the person her son had chosen to build his life with. And those were not the same thing, and she had confused them for too long. She wrote, "I would like the chance to do better, if you will allow it." I read the email 3 times. Then I went for a walk around the block, because I needed to think without my phone in my hand. Here is what I know about apologies. They don't erase things. The engagement party happened. The borscht dinner happened. Every quiet exclusion happened. An email in a formal font doesn't unhappen them. And I had spent enough time the past year learning to trust what I actually felt, rather than what I was supposed to feel, that I wasn't going to rush past that to get to the part where everything was fine. But I also know this. People can change. Not always. Not easily. But sometimes. And Helena had done something that I don't think came easily to her. She had looked at herself with some honesty, and then put it in writing. I wrote back, not warmly, not coldly, carefully. I told her I appreciated the email, and that I had heard her. I told her that trust is built over time, and I would need to see things shift in practice before I could feel safe being around her. I told her I wasn't closing any doors, but I also wasn't pretending the past year hadn't happened. She wrote back within an hour. That is fair. I understand. The first time I went back to Hamilton was around Christmas. Just for dinner. Just the 4 of us. Helena made borscht again, which felt like a deliberate choice, a kind of returning to the start. She had also made my mum's lemon cake. She had asked Daniel for the recipe, which meant she had asked Daniel to ask me, which was its own small gesture. Merrick shook my hand at the door, and then, unexpectedly, hugged me. He said, "I owe you an apology for the party. I am sorry, Rachel." He said it plainly, like a man who had practiced it enough, that it was real now, and not just practiced. I said, "Thank you, Marek." It was not a perfect evening. There were moments of awkwardness. Helena started a sentence twice that I think was going to mention Priya, and then redirected herself, and that redirecting was visible, and a little uncomfortable, but also it was an effort, and I noticed it. On the drive home, Daniel asked me how I was feeling. I thought about it honestly. "Better than I expected," I said. He reached over and took my hand. "We're getting married in September. The ceremony is at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My mum is helping me choose between 2 dresses and has opinions about both. Claire is my maid of honor." Helena asked, very carefully, if she could be involved in any of the planning, and I said she could help with the flowers. And she has taken that task with a seriousness that I find genuinely touching. Merrick is giving a toast. I know, because Daniel sat down with him and they went through it together, sentence by sentence. Daniel told me this. He wanted me to know, I am not the person I was at that engagement party, standing in the bathroom with the tap running, deciding. I am someone who decided. I stayed. I held my ground. I asked for what I needed, and waited to see if it would be given. And when it was, I moved not quickly, not completely, but genuinely towards something better. Someone told me once that forgiveness is less about the other person, and more about choosing not to carry something heavy forever. I used to think that was a nice thing people said. Now I think it's just true. I still have the ring, the sapphire with the tiny diamonds. I wear it every day. It was chosen. It was given. It is mine. And that is not nothing. That is actually everything.